Welcome everyone to the We Hack Purple product demo with Checkov from Bridgecrew, and we have Steve who's going to be giving a fantastic demo. And so, Steve, I'm going to just mute myself and disappear and let you take it away. Everyone, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Steve's really friendly and also quite funny and silly. So if you ask a question, you might get a silly answer, just to warn you.
Especially if it's a silly question. All right, I'm going to share my screen if that's cool.
Yes, please.
Make sure I share the one that's got the actual demo on it and not all the dodgy other ones that I've got kicking around here. All right, this is good. You can see, I assume you can see the security multi-tool if somebody wants to be helpful and
Yes.
Smash that thumbs up in the chat. Ah, Tanya. All right, perfect. Yes, good, fantastic. This is kind of a fun one because Checkov is our open source scanning tool for a variety of things, hence the multi-tool. It wasn't always so diverse in its purpose, but it is quite diverse now. And I have never actually presented on it because it's open source. It's not so much of a product that we go, oh, use, and we have two things. We just like utilitarian, we just kind of use it for all of our other things. And so I had to kind of create a lot of this deck like from scratch for this, which was kind of cool. It allowed me to explore all the different multi-facets of its existence. I am Steve Jaguar. I am a developer advocate at Bridgecrew. That's one of the titles I have. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm going to do a little bit more of an intro of me because I'm a narcissist, of course. So that's why I'm going to do this. I am Canadian, originally from around the Ottawa area, but now I have lived almost 50-50 in two countries, Canada and the UK, and I have dual citizenship. I have been writing code since the a long time. I have worked for a bunch of security companies, but now specializing mostly in supply chain. Why? Because supply chain is everything, essentially. So it's kind of a wide berth of security requirements there. If you ever find yourself in London, England, I run a meetup monthly there called DevSecOps London Gathering, and it is growing consistently. Particularly if you find yourself October 12th, come and see us. That's our next one. I run a cloud native security show. It's on Twitch and YouTube called C9K. You can guess what that's called. It used to have a rather profane sounding name. It does not anymore. It's family friendly. I did it about an hour ago, just before this. And if you like to throw caution to the wind and just beep QR codes, that's me there. You can be my friend. That would be nice. All right, I'm going to start by plugging OWASP. I'm going to give you a little bit of background into why Checkov exists. And I think it's important to kind of throw some context to things. OWASP is awesome, Open Web Application Security Project. Tanya knows everything about this. It changed in 2021. And in my humble opinion, I thought it became very cloudy, very cloud native-y. Some of the original gangsters of the top 10, like injection, server-side request forgery, they're there. But I like the fact that things that look very cloud to me, like broken access control, insecure design, security misconfiguration, vulnerable and outdated components, sounds very supply chain, kind of showed up. And I kind of got a feeling that the InfoSec world, the AppSec world, and the CloudSec world were uniting, and some of the traditional coding input sanitization classics have been replaced by misconfiguration and what I would call supply chain risks. Very cool. And what that means is that this is more guidance, right? It's not a tick box exercise. It's telling you what should I be looking at, and what can I do to try and solve some of these problems. So hence, this is what we're looking for. Another issue I have with what Checkov does is it largely finds, or its original intention was to find misconfiguration, and misconfigurations were kind of like a second cousin of the vulnerability of the CVE, even though a misconfiguration is very easily executed as us, mistake-ridden humans are. But the result was the same. You get outages, you get data breaches, you get lateral movements because your cloud infrastructure is often the soft, goopy interior surrounded by a hardened outer. And once you get through that via, say, a vulnerability, lots of bad things can happen. I was encouraged in latter part of last year when this came out. It was CVE 2021. It was a bug in the Nginx ingress that meant that you could provision an ingress that was based on this ingress type. If you don't know Kubernetes, bear with me. Based on this ingress type that allowed you to get access to the service account token for the actual ingress class, Nginx. And if you could get that token, it basically had the keys to the kingdom. It was a heavily provisioned token that allowed you to list all hidden secrets within the cluster, and essentially you owned everything at that point. It's not like a bug. It's not a coding issue. It's a design issue, and it got a CVE. You'd be surprised. Kubernetes has very few CVEs, and yet if we could probably do another whole session of horrible things that were in Kubernetes since its inception, yet none of them got vulnerabilities. So we're starting to give these CVEs to things that are a little less application security. I'm a big fan of that, blurring those lines. All right, another one. What are we scanning today? Infrastructure as code. What does that mean, and what types are there? There's a lot of types. We go way back into the olden days of the 90s when I used to write code. I used to do stuff in Perl and Bash. Bash is down there at the bottom. But a new generation came out, which were essentially declarative forms of infrastructure as code. YAML, Helm, Customize, CloudFormation for AWS, serverless framework. Bicep, I love Bicep because Azure Resource Manager templates are rubbish. Terraform is good. Pulumi is like a weird new hybrid where you can provision cloud infrastructure but using things like TypeScript. I feel like it falls halfway between declarative and procedural. And I think from a security perspective, there can be a little bit of trouble there. And I'll explain why that is, because declarative is very security friendly. Some other ones that just to round this out, you may not think are infrastructure as code types. GitHub Action workflows or GitLab workflows. They're in YAML mostly. There are little pockets of troublesome bash code in there. And if you've not seen a talk I do called Pwning the CI, you can go search that on Google and you can see all the bad things you can do with those. Package managers like package.json or requirements.txt, they're just lists, right? But they're actually very, very scannable. They are declarative. They are stating what you want. Same thing, which is exported JSON. So if I query an API and I say, give me the state of something, JSON's very structured, and typically the answer to that question will be in a repeatable format. So you can consider exported JSON something you can scan that is technically infrastructure as code, even though you didn't create it. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward through our declarative journey. Just a quick analogy, and this is a bit of a shout out as well to a course that exists via WeHack Purple and Bright, Infrastructure as Code Security. Go check it out. It's a follow along thing that you can get access to. Maybe if there's a link somewhere, someone like can throw it into the chat and you can find it. And I've stole this slide directly from it. Cake. How do we make cake in a procedural way? Well, if I made cake with Bash, I would preheat my oven. I would obviously, you've all got these commands in your Linux distribution. Preheat oven, layers equals 0, go into a loop, and then start mix, flour, bake, et cetera, until all my layers are done. Brill. The declarative method, and I'm going to use a more Kubernetes or YAML style here, is I'm going to say what I would like is a cake. I'm going to call it chocolate cake. I want 2 layers. I want chocolate icing, replicas, fluffy sponge. I'm going to use that container because it's a reliable sponge, trust me. And that's what I'm relying on there is a provider or orchestrator to create the cake in a repeatable and reliable way. And I'm also relying on this fluffy sponge image in order to make sure my sponge is perfect. Now, I'm not giving instructions. I'm just saying I want a cake. And what's also cool about that is that orchestrators or providers will make sure that if the cake already exists, I don't get 2 cakes. Whereas procedural, I run that twice, I get 2 cakes. So there's some extra benefits, I would say, in reliability associated with declarative. Another one is if I take the cake away, I still know that the declarative is making a cake. And unless I know what I'm doing, I may have no idea what's happening on the bash. So in terms of maintenance of infrastructure as code, although both repeatable, I think, when whoever wrote this cake recipe leaves the company and someone takes over and looks at this and goes, I don't know what's going on here. Declarative can be nicer. All right, super quick recap. Declarative infrastructure as code indicates the required state, what instead of how. Declarative is better for security. I'm going to say it. I'm not even going to say in my humble opinion. I'm just going to say that's what it is. I'm going to name drop. And if you've never heard of this name, then okay, it's not clanging too hard on the floor. Kelsey Hightower. Back in 2018, this quote's been used. This quote is actually used by Weaveworks a lot on their GitOps website. But what I liked about it is that while he was praising GitOps as the single source of truth, he said declarative configuration is the key to setting the stage for the next generation of management tools. I just had a really weird noise go there. So if you're If you want to ask a question, that'd be cool. If not, maybe go on mute so the cat doesn't step on your keyboard. All right. Going to move forward. Introduction to Checkov. All right, we got there. Amazing. Checkov is a command line tool. It can be integrated as a GitHub action if you wish, and you can download it for free from checkov.io, and we're going to check that out in 2 seconds. It was originally a Terraform scanner, and it was born out of our founder's requirement to secure his own cloud. As you can imagine, writing scripts and making sure things can happen is important, and not everybody in startups can afford an expensive CSPM tool to check things like that out. Eventually, I would say, did it get out of hand? In a good way, because it became something that is incredibly large. It scans for misconfigurations in just about any infrastructure as code language I can think of. Terraform, CloudFormation, I've got Kubernetes and the different flavors like Kustomize and Helm there. It does Bicep and ARM. It does, oh, I didn't even think of this. I haven't got the logo up there. It does Swagger, it does OpenAPI. And it also now, as of almost only just like a week ago, we're talking about how it will scan package managers like NPM and Maven POM files and PyPy requirements, etc. So it's kind of bringing everything together into a single, multi-tool is what I used earlier. There are 1,000 plus built-in checks. And just as part of this presentation, I went and looked at the list, and I've got to put a 2 in front of that now. There's 2,000 plus built-in checks now, which is kind of blows my mind, because I think when I started working at Bridgecrew 18 months ago, that number was 500. So it's progressing quickly. We do best practice and security checks, graph-based analysis checks. I'll explain graph-based actually. So for certain languages that we're working on in progress, like Terraform is a great example of that, we actually create a graph that connects all of the different resource relationships together so we can build more creative checks that have context. And I'll show you an example of one of those in a moment, but we also do this for CloudFormation, and it's something we're working on for Kubernetes. And I think when that gets done, that's going to be a pretty big deal, because that will mean we'll be able to connect together some pretty interesting rules. An example of that, I would say, would be, say I've got a privileged container, but I've got a privileged deployment or pod, but within there, I've got a container that actually has a known vulnerability that might allow remote code execution. This combination is 100% deadly. So this is the sort of thing that we'll be able to create pretty advanced rules for. And then adding that to our cloud knowledge, we'll be able to create rules that transcend the entire supply chain, which we're all pretty excited about. So, keep watching for that in the future. And I just switched to go look at questions. And all right, so what do I do with my Checkov? Code, infrastructure as code travels through a pipeline pretty much exactly the same as application code. It's born on a desktop somewhere, let's say in VS Code or JetBrains, any one of the JetBrains platforms like PyCharm. And then it goes away through Git. It might go through a pre-commit hook if you're being security or style conscious, let's say. It goes into your CI, and then some rules are run. Maybe might run a security check. You can add Checkov there as a GitHub action. You go look for it, and you'll find it. Very simple. Drag and drop into your GitHub actions to make sure you're not checking in something that is just badly configured by default. And then it goes out into the world. Now that can, if we say in the case of Kubernetes, it might become instantiated as a persistent object within a cluster, or it might go into your cloud. And then you've got runtime monitoring to try and take care of that. So it's just regular old code, Now, when we're talking about applying security, there's a lot of ways to do it. And you can see I've got a few little banners. Applying security on the left is security in nirvana, right? This is what we want. We would love those thousands of developers all to have tools on their desktop, and they're checking their code, and they're doing all the application code, they're doing all the information security code, they're doing it all. And it's like they're checking in stuff that's so good, nothing ever breaks in build, and the runtime security experts are sitting there just staring at empty dashboards. Wow, wouldn't that be fantastic, right? Now, the reality is monitoring at runtime is never going to go away, but we want to make it as simple as possible. But it's expensive, and there's hardly anybody doing it. You can see there's a rough graduation of humans down at the bottom, like 1,000 developers. Okay, well, there's probably only 100 ops people. Well, there's probably only 10 security and that's hard work. Let's keep it simple. If you want to create automation, whether you like it or not, the CI is kind of your automation hub. Lots of stuff gets added in there. And if you go searching in the, say, GitHub Action Marketplace, you'll find all sorts of great security stuff in there. And you're like, whoop, whoop, just add them all into your workflow. Fabulous, just do that. And it tends to be that all code has to go through. So we might as well do a security check there. But as a developer, you know what I can't stand, because I am a contributor to Checkov and we have a very solid pipeline, is when I make a change, it goes into CI and I don't pass a test. Now, it could just be a Python linter that just that's looking to make sure I adhere to the right style, and I make those mistakes occasionally. Or it could be I'm checking an infrastructure as code of some sort that fails because we run Checkov on Checkov, believe it or not. So this is where security is most likely to happen and most likely going to bite you, and Checkov can be an integral part of this world. But the reality is you can run it anywhere. And the important thing is, if you want to do it on the very, very left, and I'm going to show you what that looks like, I highly recommend it, because there's an idea of thinking of security as an enabler. And I think that is as opposed to, I don't know, technology or cost center, right? We want security to be an enabler, and we want it integrated into your VS Code. And I'm going to show you how easy that is, because it just becomes part of your life. Security becomes part of your life. And if you are one of those people, then you're not going to be one of those people that breaks a build. You can run it as a command line. I'm also going to show you that. You can integrate it as a pre-commit hook if you're using pre-commit. Not everybody does that, but I like pre-commit is kind of like a bit of a little ops gateway drug into security, because if you insist that everybody uses pre-commit hooks and it's part of a repo and you clone that repo, it's going to start running security checks when you try and commit something. And those checks are in the control of SecOps, essentially, not in your control. So it's not something you can avoid. So I like pre-commit, just not as popular as I would like personally. You can run it in your CI. And what's amazing is you can run it on your CI, which is another meta, I would say. GitHub Checkov also scans GitHub Actions. It also scans your GitHub repository to make sure you've actually set up your repository in a sensible way. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Now, you can remember I said Checkov started as Terraform. It's expanded. There's also an admission controller. So if you're in Kubernetes and you want to launch the admission controller, which is called Wharf, it will then run Checkov with a very much reduced subset of rules, just looking for the really bad stuff, as the guardian at the gate, or what I like to say is the bouncer, making sure that with a baseball bat, making sure you've got the nice shoes before they let you into the club. And then finally, we do have runtime, and I'm not going to talk about that all that much today. I'll maybe give you a glimpse, but that's Bridgecrew. And that's kind of Checkov at grand scale. That's where it will actually monitor what you've deployed and compare it back with what's in your GitHub repo and reconcile all of that to make sure that the whole end-to-end is secure. But we're going to start at the command line. Super simple. Getting started with Checkov, dead easy. Now, you can the simplest way to run Checkov is using the -D, and that's it. You just run Checkov, say everything below me, what's wrong with it? Or you can do a single file. And if you want to add a bit of clarity to it, and you'll see why in a moment, you can say, all right, well, be quiet. Only show me the failures. I don't want to show my successes. I don't want to bask in the glow of my wins. Or you can do -- compact, and you'll probably know what I mean when it says code segments. It'll show you the pieces it thinks that it's wrong. But if there's a lot wrong, you might want to reduce that down. And there's some other perks that you might expect from a mature tool, like, well, I want to create a config file, which essentially is a pre-recorded setting. If I run Checkov the same every time, this is good for automation. And additionally, I can create a baseline. What if I want to create a baseline because I just want no new defects going forward? This is a very popular concept in SAST tools. I know I have a lot. Let's just draw a line in the sand and let's make everything good going forward. And yes, you can have access to the slides. I see a little question in the comments there. So I'm going to just kind of shift over here and let's do this. So, and by the way, give me a comment if this is too small, because I have no idea, really. I'm running on some 4K monitor that's as big as a Times Square. So I may not have blown this up large enough, and maybe I'll blow it up just a little bit. It looks big enough. Amazing. Thank you for the feedback. All right. So I am in a repository called TerraGoat. If you go to the GitHub /Bridgecrew.io / look for repositories, we have a whole bunch of examples there that usually have goat extensions because it's kind of a security theme, and it's got a whole bunch of really, I would say bad Terraform, but default Terraform. Like a lot of the Terraform, if you go to the Terraform registry and you look at the resources and you look at the examples defaults are not secure out of the box. And yes, you can integrate Checkov into any pipeline, GitLab, Jenkins, name it. GitLab specifically, we have plugins and GitHub as well. Jenkins, I think there might be a manual method, but I'll have to check and see if we have a plugin in the marketplace for it. So I'm just going to run Checkov. I'm just going to do -d. I'm going to say dot. Oh, and by the way, this little autofill thing that I'm doing here, it's probably impossible to see, but it's there. Like if I just hit, that's a plugin for your Mac called Fig, F-I-G. I contribute the Checkov autocompletes to it, and it's wonderful. And oh, that just bombed on me. That's very abrupt beginning to my disastrous finish. I'm just going to do this again just to see if there's I overloaded my Python. All right, this is probably what I should have done before I even started. Live in the world of pipenv. So what you don't know in the background is that we actually broke Checkov today. We do like 1,000 releases an hour, and it doesn't always, and sometimes we make mistakes. What I was going to do here, and don't worry, I will fix this. I ran everything before we started. If you want to get started with Checkov, you can go to download and you can do a pip install Checkov, and then there's the first example. And I have a message saying it had been fixed. So what I'm going to do now is -u Checkov. And what the -u just means if it's already there, it's going to give you the latest version. And it's probably going to tell me 242. All right. So 240 was what I had this morning. And it did all sorts of wrong. Because everyone in Israel, which is where our engineering team is largely off this month. And so the days that they're in, which was today, we may have rushed a few things. And so when I upgraded, it broke. Tanya is asking a question about this week or this month. I don't know what you mean.
Oh, you said they're off this month.
Well,
like
they're off. They were off about a week ago, and they're going to be off for almost the entirety of October.
Oh, wow. I'm jealous. That sounds
Yeah,
great. Not for you, for them.
It's not great for me. Yeah, because there's a whole requirement to communicate with the engineering team. All right.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they fixed it. I'm up and running. Generally, that works. Checkov, just do a pip install. If one version doesn't work, they probably realize they broke it, and they will release one within about 5 seconds. So what happened here is you're probably seeing a lot more than you might have expected. Because if I do an ls in this directory, it's all Terraform. If we look at what I got, I can see that there's AWS access key. There is identified base64 high entropy string. There's a lot more here than maybe would have met the eye. There's also a Docker. We're like, what's that doing there? And then we go back and we see that, okay, here's rule number 144, ensure that an S3 bucket has cross-region replication enabled. And we can see all sorts of rules that I've broken along with, of course, the relevant code segment as well. And if we go up just a tiny bit more, you'll start to see ones that have CKV2. The CKV2 are graph checks. That means there's a relationship between resources that is either wrong or completely missing. So for example, RDS clusters have a backup plan of AWS backup. This is something we expected to see, and we didn't see it. Therefore, we're looking for connections between resources. But there's a lot to digest, looking at all of that at once. So I may not want to do just that. I might do the compact, just to try and make it quiet, and I might make it quiet. That's going to certainly reduce the output that I have to try and grab all at once. And yeah, And then I'm gonna get a very, very easy to look at group of things that isn't so massive. There we go. Now I can see all of my secrets failures, my Docker failures. The takeaway here is that if I don't tell it what I'm looking for, what IAC I'm looking for, it figures it out. It just looks through everything and goes, all right, well, it's Docker file here. Check that. There's a Terraform. Let's look at that. And it just runs the appropriate rules. It's not giving me thumbs up for infrastructure as code that just wasn't present. And if I go up to the top, we'll see that I passed 64 things. It's not telling me what they are anymore. I failed 138. Nobody's got any suppressions. And by the way, you can suppress any check you want. You can do it inline, or if you are using the Bridgecrew platform, you can do it at scale across everyone's desktop. So there's a way of doing that. But you can, if you don't agree with something, you can just say, no, I don't want to deal with it. If I were going to automate this, if we remember that over here, I had some extra perks like config files and baseline. I could just create a baseline and think, okay, well, I'm going to create baseline and leave it. So it's going to still do its thing, but this time it's going to create a baseline file. And we can see that it's, hopefully you can read blue, I'll highlight it so you can see. It's created a baseline file at .checkov baseline. And if I was running this, say, in a CI platform, if I just wanted to start through it from scratch, well, I can now back that up. I can say baseline. And I just pasted the wrong thing. I want to do my checkoff.baseline. So now checkoff is going to say, okay, the baseline has a list of things that I'm going to let go. I don't care about. And because I did it quiet, technically that's fine. Everything, it didn't produce any output whatsoever, which is what I wanted. And it's a nice silent output for some form of automation. And the other one I was saying is that if this is the same thing I'm going to run every single time, actually, let's get rid of the baseline for now. I can turn it into a repeatable config file like this. So if I want to specify the particular file, say I'm going to call it checkoff.config. Then it's going to run what I've got there. And it's going to say, all right, wrote the config file. I can take a look at what that looks like. And we can see I've got master true. So all the things I ran are here, which is great because now I can do checkoff -- config file, and I can specify this file. And it's just going to run what's in that file in a repeatable way. And that's a really popular mechanism now because you can have a different config file in your repository. And if you call it, there's actually a default, which is just called .checkoff.config. That if it's present, it will run and just use that. So this is a really handy thing for having the right rules for the right repository, and you can even add suppressions in line. So if I show you, believe me, there's no hope I'm going to go through all of Checkov today. I just want to go through some of the big highlights. You can see there's a lot of things we can do. We can skip certain things. We can specify I only want particular checks to run. I can run custom checks. I can use enforcement rules from the top. I can be specific about hard fails and soft fails. So I can say these checks, I just want to know about them. These ones are definite hard fails. So, and I can do it based on severity, or I can be specifically naming things. So there's a lot of additional perks that I haven't listed here that are possible just with Checkov as a whole.
There's
All right.
a question in the chat. Does Checkov look for CIS benchmark compliance requirements?
It doesn't have a setting. So anything that's considered a benchmark is actually part of the Bridgecrew platform. I for better or for worse. So Checkov is the engine behind Bridgecrew. And you can go into Bridgecrew, see the results, and say, how did I do on CIS? And it will show you there graphically, but it's not part of the CLI. Good question. Could change in the future. Never know. Okay, so scanning Terraform and CloudFormation, I'm introducing here that you can be specific about your framework. And infrastructure as code is kind of the root of the original Checkov, where we're doing Terraform, CloudFormation, Bicep. These are all the different ones. And you can see I've gotten little brackets, SCA, image, and secrets. It scanned for secrets because I didn't tell it not to. Thank you, Angela, for that answer in the chat. So I can be really specific here by not using my config file and backing up and saying, all right, I'll love all the secrets perk, but I just really want to see Terraform, please. And actually, personally, this actually makes Checkov faster. See how quick that was? Because when it doesn't have to figure out what I've got below, it goes amazing. It invokes the Terraform scan runner, and then pow, all I get is my Terraform. And that's a really quite interesting way of doing things. If we actually saw what happened there when I did this, it gave me a list of all the different frameworks. And I'm sure you can't see it, but I can tell you Terraform, GitHub, customized secrets, like there's a whole list there that you can feast upon. And it's pretty easy. Now you note over here, I've got extra configuration, right? And that's his BC API key. If you are using the platform, you can add an API key as an environment variable like that, or as a command line parameter, which I'm not going to do because I don't want you all to have my API key. And then put your thing on there. And you get extra additional features, which is actually pretty nice. You can go to the platform, it's free, and you can get an API key. It just means, a great example is, and I'll show you when we look at VS Code, there are certain databases that aren't baked into Checkov. One, vulnerabilities, and two is suggested fixes. We can do that, but that's in a whole other world, and you have to have an API key to ask for those special perks. You can get an API key. Like I just typed Checkov with nothing, no parameters whatsoever, no config, and suddenly it shows me all the things I can get if I allow it to get an API key, and it'll go do it for me. I'm not going to do it right now. But just follow the directions, give it an email address. You never leave your console, and it'll actually create an account for you and get an API key and store it locally for you in a .bridgecrew directory under your home. And you can then use that in VS Code, and we'll see what happens in VS Code when we do that. So really, really easy way to get more features. You can see GitHub. I'm going to show you a lot of these other features as well. Scanning Kubernetes. Scanning Kubernetes is not as straightforward as you might think. There's a lot of weirdness in the way the YAML looks. And plus, not everybody uses straight up Kubernetes. A lot of people use Helm, because Helm just makes Kubernetes a lot easier. Maybe less popular, but a personal favorite of mine is Kustomize. Kustomize creates this class structure around the way you create Kubernetes manifests. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Additionally, again, the SCA image I'm going to touch on at the very end because I think it's very cool. But all the same sort of things apply, and you get extra perks with the API key. So I'm going to pop over here and see if this one broke or not, but I hope not. So I'm in a customized directory, and yes, we have another goat. And if I look at it, you can see the way customized Kubernetes YAML is created, there is a base. So think of it like a class structure in programming. If I look at the base class, let's say for the deployment, it's pretty much your bog standard Nginx looking. It's a cut and paste, in fact, from the documentation for Kubernetes on what a deployment should look like. 2 replicas, the app label. It is using a particular homemade bad, let's say vulnerable image there, but that's all good. Now I wouldn't want to deploy that because I'm not doing any of the right things there in the slightest. But if I were to scan it, and I could scan it, I could do Checkov, and I would definitely want to say this is, and I don't have to say it this time, but I'm going to, this is customized. But I could do, let's do Kubernetes, because it is just plain Kubernetes at this point. The base image is always just straight up Kubernetes, and then I'm going to scan -F for a single file, base, deployment. And I have different windows. So I'm assuming everything's going to be cool in my Checkov upgrade, and this is just going to work. Kubernetes framework, because I told it. And there we go. Bunch of stuff wrong, because the default deployments straight out of documentation don't do any good things. There isn't even a security context. Every example of a deployment you see in documentation almost never has the most important section, and that is security context. Read-only file system, everything is there and it tells me what's wrong. The trouble we have with things like Customize and Helm when you're trying to implement security measures is that they don't look, they're in a different format. And you have to kind of mash it all together to see, to find security misconfigurations. So in this particular case, if I were to look at, I'm going to show you what an overlay looks like. I'm going to do the test overlay and deployment. So if you see what this looks like, this is a totally invalid Kubernetes YAML. It's just got pieces. So I've increased the replicas, I've overridden the replicas to 5, and I've got some pod affinity added in here to make sure that my different examples go into different nodes. Okay, I can't scan that on its own because it just looks weird. Anything, if you've got another tool out there that says we scan Kubernetes YAML, well, I don't know what, I'm not scanning the result, and that would just break most tools. But it doesn't break Checkov, which is nice. And this is something being a, let's say, a Kubernetes enthusiast was a big fan of when we added this. So I do my overlays, and I do my test, and I do my deployment. So now I'm telling, okay, this is customized, so don't use the current Kubernetes one on it because it'll just blow up. Convert, do your customized thing, and customize is built into Checkov, and try and find out what's wrong with what's going on there. And it did something weird on me. Oh, you can see that I've got the API key. This just as an aside, because it's telling me where to go see the results in the, I'm a little confused as to why that didn't work. The demo gods are being unhappy with me today. I might just run it again just to be sure, or I'm just going to do a -D on the overlays, just to make sure I didn't get my self into a bit of a pickle. I also didn't upgrade my Checkov in this particular window. That could be a problem because I might be running the broken version. I'd prepared all of this in advance. And I ran every command before we started. Yay, okay, all right. I'm just gonna pause right here and just say, look, you can see this is the base plus the add-on. So we're finding issues in the entire result, which is great. That's exactly what I want to see as a result. And of course, if I end by just looking at prod, this is what the one that's going into production. The prod one is actually a perfectly secure deployment model. So if you're ever looking for like a really good example of YAML that will deploy and doesn't have any security misconfigurations, you can go check out Customize Go and just go directly to the prod directory and see what that looks like, because this should come up and just say, yay, yeah, perfect, everything's passed. 140 different Kubernetes checks, all perfect. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. Oh, good. I'm glad that worked in the end. I don't know why things are being a little bit funny, but apologies for that. All right, scanning the supply chain. This one's really new. Workflows. So it's not here, but that's also included in this list. Now for GitHub, you need to add a few little things, and I'm going to do something and it's going to make me glitch for 2 seconds. We have a VPN that only lets you turn minutes, and it's 1740. So it just turned itself back on. And my internet went, oh, I could see it happen. All right, great. I'm back. So you need a GitHub token that is read-only to your repo, and you need to create some variables that say what branch do you want. If there's an org is optional. What repository is it? So if it's just, say, Terragoat, just write the word Terragoat. And if the repo owner is you, then put you. And then say what framework you want, go into the clone of the directory and try it out. So is this supply chain configuration? Yes. So in this particular instance, I'm in the directory for our open source project, Your. And Your has lots of good things, but I've done a clone of it that isn't necessarily as amazing as the actual YOR. I've kind of turned off some of the usual security items that might be there. This is something you can run. You can see GitHub configuration framework, and it's using the GitHub token and API to pull down things like what does the configuration for this repository look like? Is branch protection turned on? It's doing some of the basic security checks. Ensure there are two admins set for each repository. No, not anymore because I forked it. Ensure branch protection rules require signed commits. So now I'm getting all the best practices that should be in place for a GitHub repository to make sure that someone can't come in and start abusing you, actually using GitHub workflows. You can use GitHub workflows to abuse a lot of these settings that aren't set correctly. So this is something you can do to not only check code that's going into your Git, check the destination of Git to make sure that actually you're putting this into a repo that actually is configured sensibly. I'm really happy that worked. So another one I want to show you is GitHub workflows, and this will be really quick. Now you can see that we scan GitHub Actions, Bitbucket pipelines, Argo workflows. Good, it is there. GitLab and Circle CI. And some of these were only added in the past 2 months. I added GitHub and GitLab, and the rest of the team added some of the other ones off the back of that. What's interesting about scanning GitHub workflows, for example, is that they need to be in a .github workflows directory. So if you're trying this out and you're testing it, make sure it's in, because that's the identifier. Otherwise, if you've got YAML in there, it will look at the YAML and go, oh, is this Kubernetes YAML or what is this YAML? So there's ways we have of indicating what's what. Now, what I can do here is if I want to check, say this one here, issue grooming, I'm going to say GitHub Actions. It's going to check this YAML, but it's going to put in place a growing number of rules to say, all right, is there anything weird going on in this workflow? You can see some of the really, really bizarre ones, like why is netcat in a workflow? Do you have actions allow insecure commands set as an environment variable to let you circumvent certain basic security measures? Are you using curl inside a workflow? Always a bad move. And then the one down here that fired is a line in a run that's echoing the GitHub event issue title. That's super bad. Any metadata, this is classic AppSec. If any metadata that is in user control gets into a workflow and you use it like this in any of the run sections, which are bash, then you can submit that using backticks, which will resolve and you have remote code execution inside the workflow. So you have to be very careful. There's a whole lot of bad things that can happen with workflows, both in GitLab and in GitHub. And we have a growing list of rules that are checking to make sure that that happens and you're submitting workflows that are correct. I've got a whole presentation on that one. They do occupy a whole other 45 minutes. And I'm speaking of 45 minutes, I'm getting to the top of the hour, so I'm going to start blasting through. Secrets I don't really have to demonstrate because you saw it when I first started. If I don't say anything, it's going to scan for secrets. And what's kind of interesting about this, and I want to show you over here, is that if I look at the number of rules we have, and this is the thing I only checked recently. You can see we have Alibaba Cloud, like things that we have added recently, different cloud coverages. If we go down to the bottom, this is why I was surprised, 2,842 different rules. That's why it seems that even I cannot keep up with how many different things that we've got. But if we go down and look at the different versions of secrets that we look for, just so you can get a feel for what we're finding, we can straight up look for high entropy strings, but we also have characterized a lot of different very obvious shapes via regex, of course. Artifactory, AWS, JSON Web Tokens, MailChimp, like really quite specific ones. So if you're interested in doing secret scanning with Checkov, you could just use it for that on its own and you'd still have a pretty top-notch secret scanner. Secrets are ubiquitous across all IAC, so it's not necessarily something you want to get rid of. It's just a good thing that's always there. All right, this is, I think, the last thing I want to show you, and you can see if there's any more questions. No, good, fantastic. And this is SCA image, and you do need an API key for this, for sure, because we are reaching out into a vulnerability database. Worth also noting that output formats also include CycloneDX SBOM format. So when you're doing any of these checks, If you want the output not to just show up on the console, you want to be churned into an automated generated software bill of materials with vulnerabilities, you can do that with Checkov now. So I'm going to jump over to the last one over here, oddly called Janky Bank. And I'm going to just check a deployment. And that's all I'm going to do. And I'll also show you it via VS Code if I can find that, if I remember where I put it. And it's using an API key. So I know it's taking a little bit longer, and I'll tell you why that is in a second. So it's taking longer because if you look up here, I have all of the same classic mistakes in my very basic deployment YAML that I made before. But because I made reference to an image, it also scanned the image. And this is an intentional image. It has a certain celebrity bug in it. And the combination of what I've generated here, oh, also it's using a very old version of Apache Tomcat with several critical vulnerabilities. And this is kind of the next generation of where we're going here with Checkov. I have log4j, which is a pretty horrible thing to do. And I've also failed container could not be privileged. Basically, what I've created here is a deployment that is the worst thing that could possibly ever happen. Based on this, I can execute my own code inside this pod, and because it's privileged, I can pop out of the pod and I can get access to the underlying node or host. And if that host is over provisioned, I have access to the entire cloud. So it's a supply chain disaster, and I was able to find the key points of it using a very simple command line tool. The other way of doing that, of course, is we integrate with VS Code. If I hover over the exact same file here, I can see the exact same information, but now I'm doing this in VS Code. So the whole interface you just saw integrates nicely into VS Code with little squiggly, obvious things combining both types of vulnerabilities. I mean, I could just click on the POM and you'll see Checkov down here go about its merry way to scan the POM file, because so we scan package managers as well. This POM happened to be what built the dodgy container. They're not always in the same repo, but in this case, they kind of just happen to be, because it's an intentionally experimental, vulnerable environment. Checkov taking its sweet little time. The same thing goes for here. It works in IntelliJ. Yeah, any of the JetBrains. So IntelliJ, PyCharm, there's a bunch, right? But they all have the same engine, so they use the same plugin. So yes, it works there too. This is another very similar version where I have an ECS task definition service that's making reference to two images, Nginx and Python. And there's nothing wrong with the task definition, but there is something wrong with the version of Python I've got down here. So it's coming up there as well. And my POM's done, and I can hover over the POM and I can see, yeah, log4j. What am I doing? Am I out of my mind? 2.14.1? No way, man. So that's kind of where I want to end really quick. I think the last thing I would probably do, just because I would be remiss if I didn't, I mentioned Bridgecrew. Where I got the API key was Bridgecrew, and that same scan of Janky Bank here does also show me all the vulnerabilities, all in the same spot. What's cool, one of the biggest things I love about the doing it all through the platform is that if I wanted to fix this, I can, and it will create a pull request in my Janky Bank repo that will bump my version up to the safe version for me. So auto package bumping, I think, is a pretty legendary addition, and that only just came out like a week ago. So that's the only plug I'm going to do for the platform. I think Chekhov's amazing, but if you need to do what Checkov does, you need to do it at scale. Well, that's what it's for. Cool. There we go. That's the end. Thanks for playing. This has been a lot of fun to do a Checkov demo, because I've never done such a comprehensive demo before. And I'm already feeling, gosh, there's so much more I could have shown you. So go grab it, download it, and have a play.
Nice job, Steve. That was awesome.
Yeah,
I feel
only
like
two things went wrong.
every time I do a live demo, things go wrong. I
Yep.
think this went surprisingly well, actually.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions? I know Steve answered questions throughout the entire presentation. Oh, there's another question. Do you have these Terraform vulnerable scripts available for us so we can do our own test?
Yeah, I can put it into the chat now, or if there's a way we can get them to them afterwards. It's called TerraGoat, and it's in our repo. I'll paste it into the chat now. Oh, there we go. Look at Angela. What a wizard.
I'm gonna save that actually so that I can put it in the notes for later.
So
So
there's a CloudFormation goat, a TerraGoat, a customized goat, a supply chain goat. There's a bunch. So check them out.
awesome. Does anyone else have any questions for Steve? I know that he answered them as he kind of went along, but
I did my
were there
best
any?
to. That's a
I
no.
think
It's
it's
not, no problem.
funny everyone names everything goat, scapegoat,
I think,
web
yeah.
goat.
OWASP started it, so everyone's on the train.
Awesome. Yeah, that was great.
Cool. Pretty happy. In the end, everything worked, even if there was some minor delays. Um,
Yes.
something I should mention actually, if you do clone, because Checkov is open source, so bridgecrew.io/Checkov is the repo for it. If you do clone the whole thing, right up at the top level, there's a directory called tests. Tests has all the code that we run all of our rules on. So there's examples for every single rule in the repo for Checkov if you ever want to have a play there.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really good. I like that. I enjoy thoroughness, so that's excellent.
Yes, it's almost like test-driven development-y sort of thing. We write the bad things and then we write rules to fix them.
Excellent. Bright has a similar thing. They have Broken Crystal's website, which a zillion things are wrong with. And then it's
Awesome.
like, okay, so let's scan it and make sure we actually find everything. It's been pretty fun to play with.
Sweet.
Cool. Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, then I'm going to thank you, Steve, and thank you, Bridgecrew, for letting us borrow you and have you given a spectacular demo for us for an entire hour. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this We Hack Purple event, and we will see you all next time. We're going to send out an email with, like, this is the video in case you missed it, etc. And for that, goodbye, everyone. See you next time. Thank
Bye.
you.